Good afternoon and welcome to ARM's pre-fly-in webinar. I'm Paige Bischoff. I'm ARM's Senior Vice President of Global Public Affairs. And on behalf of our sponsors and the entire ARM team, I'd really like to extend our sincere thanks to our two distinguished guests for joining us today. Please join me in welcoming Democratic Congresswoman Diana DeGette, representing Colorado's 1st District, and Republican Congressman Fred Upton, representing Michigan's 6th District. They were responsible for the 21st Century Cures Act, designed to accelerate medical product development and bring transformative innovations to patients faster and more efficiently. ARM worked closely with the bill sponsors to ensure that authorization of the RMAT approval pathway for regenerative medicines was included in the 2016 law, and we appreciate continuing to work closely with both offices in their drafting of Cures 2.0. Here at ARM, we champion the innovation that cell and gene therapies can deliver to patients, and we're proud to say that Representatives Upton and DeGette have each previously been named ARM's Legislator of the Year. We are thrilled to have them join us for this fireside chat to talk details about Cures 2.0 and other important topics for our sector. And now, if you will, I'm going to share a brief run of show with you. We'll hear opening remarks from both of the legislators, and then we're going to go into a Q&A session. We would very much like to thank the members of our Market Access and Value and Government Relations Committees who are instrumental in developing those questions. And if we have time at the end, we're happy to open up the floor to your questions as well. Please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen to send in any questions. We are not going to be using the chat function for that purpose today. And now let's begin with some opening remarks. Congresswoman DeGette, would you please start us off?
Thank you so much, Paige. And I really want to extend thanks to ARM for all of the wonderful work and advice they gave us on 21st Century Cures. I know Fred agrees with me completely. Your organization was invaluable as we fashioned that bill. And we're happy to be back here again today to talk about the advances we made with 21st Century Cures and also our exciting new legislation we're getting ready to unveil, Cures 2.0. As you know, Fred and I came together in 2015 to develop bipartisan legislation that would really revolutionize how we do biomedical research and then how we approve drugs and devices to treat the world's most difficult diseases. And that effort has been really hailed as one of the most comprehensive pieces of healthcare legislation since the ACA. Since the passage of this bill, the nation has become better at screening for and preventing certain kinds of cancer. We also have developed a better understanding of the human brain. We're making significant strides in the advances of regenerative medicine. We've increased funding for Alzheimer's research, and they've even developed some exciting new treatments and cures for cystic fibrosis. And what we've also seen as a result of this legislation is a record number of new generic drugs approved for market, which of course lowers healthcare costs for millions of Americans. We've created new opportunities for young scientists to do research, and we funded some important research programs like now President Biden's Cancer Moonshot, the Brain Initiative, and the Regenerative Medicine Innovation Project. So congratulations. But what we realized a year or two ago is that we're still not done. There were still some things that weren't perfected under 21st Century Cures. And so Fred and I have been working on new legislation called Cures 2.0 to build on the tremendous success that we made. And so while the goal of the first Cures Act was to modernize how we delivered new treatments for new patients, or how we developed the cures, Cures 2.0 is designed to help us deliver the cures to patients. One thing that we've learned from the pandemic is our federal agencies must be much better prepared for future healthcare crises. And so we address that in our bill. We are also looking for ways to modernize the CMS to help speed up their decision-making process, because it doesn't do any good if you have drugs or devices, but people can't afford them. And so, so something else that Fred and I are working with the White House on is this new concept based on DARPA over at the Department of Defense called ARPA-H for addressing the really thorny problems that we still have in disease. Obviously, rare diseases, cancer, diabetes, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, so many. And then Vice President Biden, of course, worked with us on the cancer moonshot. And now the White House is working with us to try to develop an agency that will have a lot of collaboration between the government, private research universities, and the private sector to develop cures for these really thorny diseases. And so that's what Fred and I are working on. There's a lot of moving parts. We're really excited, and we're hoping to unveil our discussion draft soon. And with that, we can work even more closely with all of you to find cures for disease. With that, back to you, Paige, back to you, unless you want me to turn it over to Fred.
Oh, thanks much. I think Congressman Upton, please go ahead.
Well, thanks, Paige, and I'm delighted to do this. Diana and I think we've done, I know, dozens and dozens of Zooms all the time. I know what her living room looks like. She knows what my living room looks like. We're going to have votes in a little while and the rest of the week before we go home for Memorial Day. But I just want to echo her remarks in that thank you. Thanks big time. ARM did a wonderful job. They were an integral part in getting 21st century cures to President Obama. It was literally the last bill that he signed into law, the last formal bill signing that he did. And it was a collaborative effort. I was then chairman of Energy and Commerce. Diana and I both serve on that great committee. And we needed every single day. We actually started 3 years out before we got that bill signed in December of 2016. We passed it. We had amazing stumbling blocks ahead of us, but we got through them all. We passed it unanimously in our committee, 53-0. We passed it on the House floor, 392-26. We avoided a filibuster, and that was rough going as well, but we got 75 votes. Remember, you have to get 60. So, but our margin in the House helped push it through the Senate, where ultimately it passed 92-8. We had great support on both sides of the aisle. And I'll tell you, Diana cracked the whip on her side. I cracked the whip on ours. We had the support of our respective leaderships, from Nancy Pelosi and Steny Hoyer to Kevin Brady, now the chairman or the ranking member on Ways and Means, but Paul Ryan and John Boehner were really terrific as well, as we lined the planets to get this thing done. And as I look back, and Diana gave some of the highlights of what we've seen happen since 2016, frankly, we wouldn't have a vaccine today, or maybe would be just approved for the COVID issue without our legislation getting done. We coupled it with $45 billion in more health research, and obviously the regenerative piece was a mighty important piece, and one that really helped bring folks together to get it done. And literally for the last year and a half now, Diana and I have been working on an update. That's why we call it 2.0. We're very close to unveiling the next discussion draft. She and I met for a good period last week. Our staffs, by the way, have been terrific. Don't steal them. They did a remarkable job. We're relying on a lot of folks. We've got, I think, 400 or 500 different comments from folks as we put this discussion draft out last fall. And frankly, COVID has slowed us down. Even though Diane and I are close, we're doing a lot of stuff together. It's hard, it's a legislative body. Often you've got those personal relationships, you've got all those, our schedules are different. We're in DC for 2 weeks and then we're home for 3. And so you got to do these Zooms and get everyone to connect. You don't have those discussions. I still don't know some of the freshmen on our side of the aisle because you just don't see them. We actually voted by alphabet. I'm at the end with a U. DeGette's at the beginning with a D. Hopefully we're going to see things change a little, but we're making progress. And our hope is that probably in the next couple of weeks, we will release our next discussion draft. Diane and I had a really good session with our crew last week before we went back to our states. I'd like to, one of the provisions that we have is going to be really requiring HHS to submit a report to Congress regarding the current state of cell and gene therapy regs and the foreseeable regulatory challenges for the FDA in the future. We knew that when we did our bill, we sat down with the FDA and we said, we want to expedite the approval of drugs and devices. Tell us what we need to do. And they said, well, we're going to need more resources. I said, fine. What do you need? He said, well, why don't we start with $250 million? This was before COVID. So 250 million was 250 million. And we said, done. And then they said, well, we really need 500. I said, done. It's there because we're going to rely on everyone to get the job done. And that certainly happened with COVID. And I'll just have a little private note here. So Pfizer is my largest employer. In fact, Diane has been to my district. I've been to hers. She met with a number of my local Pfizer folks in Kalamazoo. And the chairman, this last summer, as they went to get the vaccine approval, told his people, he said this, spend whatever it takes. Spend whatever it takes to get it done. And they did. And it was so exciting. I think even Diana called me that Sunday afternoon. Aren't you excited as the trucks rolled out of that production facility in Portage, Michigan on that Sunday and to the FedEx and to UPS folks to get the job done. We're excited about this next product as well. We want your comments. We're going to need your help. We're going to, we want to get it done. Our goal is to actually get this thing done this year. And to work with the Senate, we're starting those discussions now. But because of what we did, people are looking at the two of us at really bringing folks together again to really do step 2, which we're going to call 2.0. So for that, why don't I stop, see what questions you might have, but it's a delight to be with you. And again, thanks so much for helping us get this thing done. I can't tell you how many lives that we've saved and will save because of what we were able to get done in 2016.
Excellent. Wonderful. You both have sparked a lot of questions. Luckily, I think our committee members anticipated a number of these things that they wanted to ask you. So it's great that we're all going to be on the same page. Let me start, first of all, with the fact that it's pretty unique. You've been able to create a bipartisan situation that resulted in a very impressive act 5 years ago. You're coming together again to update this at a time of extreme partisanship. What secret sauce do you two have, and how are you able to really, on behalf of the good of the bill and what it means for patients in America, how are you able to plan to rally, your respective parties, particularly given, again, an extremely partisan Congress?
Well, as Fred always says, disease is not partisan. Disease impacts Democrats, Republicans, unaffiliateds, all alike. And there's a tremendous desire in the US Congress to address particularly these seemingly intractable diseases that we have: cancer, diabetes, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, rare diseases. And so people try, and now that we did 21st Century Cures, people trust us to know. Fred and I aren't always going to agree on everything. We have had disagreements in the past when we did 21st Century Cures on particular issues. We either worked through those issues or we left them out of the bill. And so it's that kind of working together that I think you'll see. But I also think you'll see tremendous bipartisanship, because already a lot of people have shown interest. And Fred, Fred and I both know the numbers of people who voted for cures, but I think that's worth hearing again, how many, exactly the level of support. And I think we'll have more support even now because it's been so successful.
Yeah, I'll confess, we also know the people that didn't support cures.
Right.
was in my office last week. I got this pile, and in that pile, I got the 26 folks. I know they are. Some of them are gone, but we know where they are. Let me just add a couple things. Look, it's a very toxic time. We know that. Look what happened on January 6th. But we also, as I've served on the health subcommittee since 1991, and I look just the same, youthful, full of energy. Those baby Ruth candy bars help. No cavities, but let me just say, we're all touched by diseases. Our neighbors that might have Alzheimer's or ALS, kids with pancreatic cancers. Because we're involved in healthcare, we see the folks that need our help the most. We also, we're in that position where we see the real researchers, and I went to Diana's district and she came to mine. We both been to MD Anderson, Mayo, all these different wonderful places. You hear the researchers talk about the things that they'd like us to help them do, particularly on the funding side, but to see the advances, to actually kick the tires and look at and see what they're working on is really, really exciting. And I got to say this, then Vice President Biden, now President Biden, he's into this. This is going to be his legacy too. He did yeoman work for us when he was vice president to make sure that we spread the course right. As Diana touched on, we did the Biden Moonshot Initiative, $1 billion, and again, $1 billion was $1 billion, back then, and it was there. He called us into the Oval Office, the two of us, a couple weeks ago now. He talked about his new initiative called ARPA-H, which again, Diana touched on. It's going to happen. Working with the White House, it'll be, a whole new research arm, likely within the auspices of the NIH. It's going to mean more funding, which is something, again, that it's always been bipartisan. I worked for President Reagan a lot of years ago. We had a Democratic Congress, Republican president. He got things done. He didn't care who got the credit for it. He got things done. And that's what we're going to be trying to do now with 2.0. People do know that we've got the vaccine approvals because of what we did with 21st Century Cures. We're looking for the next step of this, and we're going to do whatever it takes, bodily harm, if we need to make sure that we get 2.0 across the finish line as we work together.
Congressman Upton, I'm very curious to follow up on something you mentioned in your opening remarks, if there will be something contained within 2.0 regarding HHS submitting a letter to Congress regarding FDA and the future of cell and gene therapies. Obviously, PDUFA negotiations between the industry and FDA are coming to a close at this point. We could not agree with you more that we'd love to see funding, not just for FDA, but for CBER, which oversees the review of cell and gene therapies. Would you be talking about specific funding as well for CBER?
We might. That's something that I think is on the table. I don't know that we've gotten that specific quite yet. But, that's one of the things that, as I look back at what we did on cures, I can remember sitting in this office room, and remember I can do whatever we wanted for that. We had a room on the third floor of Rayburn, and it was Diana and me, and we talked about the money that we wanted for the NIH. I had really sort of cut my teeth on healthcare back in the 90s when it was John McCain and myself, Republican side, and it was Henry Waxman and Paul Wellstone, Democratic side, and together we did the bill to double the money for the NIH, and we haven't kept up, which is why we worked so hard, Diane and I, on getting a big shot in the arm for the NIH. And I got to say that former administrations, both Republican and Democrat, you point the finger at both, they've sort of shorted NIH in their budget requests to play the budget game. We're going to get a balanced budget, and we're going to do this and that. They always knew when they shorted the NIH, they always knew that Congress wouldn't go along with that. And we didn't, never. Biden, to his credit, has a significant these initiatives, just like what we told the FDA. We want to know what it's going to cost, and we want to make sure that there's funding for there. for them, including it for university research and others. A lot of that was cut back because of COVID. They closed the labs. No students could go in. I mean, whole states were shut down, and that research stopped. Diana and I together have introduced legislation called the RISE Act, which is more research money that'll go to sort of help those areas that really got shortchanged just because of that research stopped because no one was going to the labs. So I can see that this could in fact be part of this as we get to a more detailed approach that we might be releasing probably early next month.
Great. And thank you both for acknowledging working with ARM previously. We look forward to continuing working with you on Cures 2.0. And to that end, what can we be doing? And in particular, what can our members be doing to really provide you with the resources, background, guidance that you might need as you're furthering the next discussion draft, which it sounds encouragingly we might see in the next couple of weeks?
Well, let me say that first of all, I was just looking at the chat. I know people aren't supposed to ask questions in the chat, but somebody asked a question in the chat about value-based agreements. Now, this is an issue that's not, I don't believe it's in Cures 2.0 right now, but it's an issue that I think would be really worth discussing, just like the issues that Fred was just talking about now. And if we don't have professionals in the field to talk to us about that, then we don't understand how that interacts with what you do every day and how it helps us to get breakthrough therapies or to get other types of cures for diseases. So your input on not just the big overall issues, like we need increased NIH funding, we need to make breakthrough therapies and CMS coverage better, but on the really granular issues that we may not even know about. Fred and I are not researchers. We're just lowly members of Congress. And we do know a lot about, we've learned a lot over the years about the research process and the research industry. But if we don't those finer points that are specific to regenerative medicine, then we can't make as robust or effective as a bill that we can. And I frankly think that's why 21st Century Cures was such a successful bill, because Fred and I met with every single group that we could, patient groups, different types of medical groups, doctors. We met with the agencies themselves, and we took all of their input and we made this bill. I always like to say that the funding was important in 21st Century Cures, but the guts of the bill was about 300 plus pages of legislation that restructured the way we do the research. And we could have never done that without you and your members. So what's helpful, number one, if your members contact their whoever their contact is at your organization with ideas, but also then that they look at when the discussion draft comes out, if they look at it and see what we're missing or what could be added, what new ideas there are, and then ultimately, once we get the bill, assuming you all agree with it, which I'm sure you will, is they can help us as lobbyists in their own districts, lobbying their own members of Congress, House and Senate to pass it.
Yeah, we're going to want, let me just piggyback a little bit. Diana's exactly right. Just because of the congressional schedule, I'm not looking to see that we're going to have lots of hearings on this.
No.
We've been listening, done some roundtables, but the legislative process is more like more molasses this Congress than ever before. So that's why we need your input. And we're going to need your help again. I mean, we want to shorten that list of opposition. We know that we still have hurdles to get done. We're going to try to be a hot knife through butter through the Senate, and hopefully do a good enough job in the House that they won't need to do a lot. Just in essence, take what we want as we work with the administration as we did before to get this ultimately to the president. So that's why this next version, when we put it out, probably in early June, is going to be important. And I'm not looking at the chat things. I got enough to look at, but we're going to input and thoughts and where we can make improvements to this for sure.
Great. Well, also another question for you, given the administrative healthcare disparities, do you think that there's room in Cures 2.0 to ensure fair access, especially for Medicaid patients? And what might that look like?
Fred, you want to start?
Absolutely. We saw that with the COVID trials. One of the things that Diana and I really concentrated on, and we beat back the argument, we weren't going to take shortcuts in the approvals of these drugs and devices, and we didn't. But it was sure exposed with COVID that we need to do a better job with different demographics in terms of the studies. It reminds me of the old days. It certainly got to be embarrassing just about anybody that ever saw that statistic, that when breast cancer was researched, there were more studies with men than with women. Terrible precedent that needs to be changed. So we're actively going to be working, particularly with the Congressional Black Caucus and others, to make sure that those disparities are wiped clean. Look to the future on this.
And there is a provision in the you can see it in the white paper. It's going to be in the discussion draft as well. A provision for increasing diversity in clinical trials, because as much as we tried to do that in 21st Century Cures, we're still not near where we need to be. And as Fred says, we really realized through COVID that we need to get better data in all the clinical trials. And in terms of Medicaid accessibility, the CMS, there's a GAO report on Medicare coverage in the provisions, but I expect that there's also a number of provisions in the CMS section on Medicaid accessibility, telemedicine, other types of innovations and access. Because as I said earlier, if all patients can't get access to cures, then it really is not going to matter if you have the cures available. We've seen that with certain therapies that have been approved by the FDA but are not covered by private insurance or by CMS. And so some of these therapies, there are more. And so this is something that we really need to lean in on, that if it really is a useful therapy, that we need to have that kind of reimbursement.
Following up on that a little bit from a regulatory perspective, the creation of the RMAT designation and other accelerated approval pathways, were very helpful in terms of getting therapies reviewed for serious unmet need diseases. But we're starting to see some proposals out there that would undermine and or disincentivize the use of these pathways. So how might we be able to work together with policymakers to preserve these and helping policymakers to really understand that therapies approved through these pathways are not less than other drugs?
Well, so it's as I was saying, most members of Congress don't spend half of their waking hours thinking about reimbursement or approval processes or any of these intricacies, which are vitally important to not just to your industry, but to patients. And so this is where, and Fred and I, we sometimes marvel at the fact that we've sort of become the experts on biomedical research in Congress, since neither of us has this background. And so that's why it's so important that your members really are the voice of this. And if you, and the other thing I'll say, there's thousands of pieces of legislation every year. And so if you see legislation that's particularly concerning, chances are most members of Congress wouldn't know about it. And so it's the flip side of the coin of helping lobby people for bills that you care about, also telling people the risks and problems of bills that are going to undermine what we're trying to do.
Yeah, and let me also add that, you know, this, even though Diane and I sort of own this because we work so well together and we got it done, we're absolutely open to all of our members. You know, there's a good docs caucus. It's bipartisan, Republicans, Democrats. I mean, we really paid, I hope, a lot of attention to listening. And we're looking at individual bills that are out there that we can incorporate as part of this. This is looked at sort of like a train. This is the engine. We're pulling a lot of boxcars with us. And so if you can identify areas that you think can help us with the ultimate goal of speeding up the approval of drugs, we want to make a difference. We don't want it to go over the side. We want it to be part of that train coming forward.
And we already have a number of, Fred's right, we already have incorporated a lot of members' bills into the draft, the discussion draft of Cures 2.0.
Pretty hard to vote the bill if you got a bill in it, if you're another member. So it's just another inducement to get people on board.
So to that end, do you foresee that Cures 2.0 likely to be wrapped up into the next FDA user fee reauthorization?
You know, I'm not the chairman anymore, so I don't know what Frank Pallone, how he's going to work that. It's always, you know, that's always been a bipartisan issue, and usually by voice vote. I mean, we did, you know, PDUFA and SGR reform and all these other acronym bills. Greg Walden did the same. So I'm not sure exactly what it could well be, but we've not actually had that discussion with Frank yet. And maybe
I would be more, I'm not sure a bill like this, particularly if it includes the ARPA-H provision, I'm not sure it would be included in PDUFA reauthorization, but you know, look, Fred and I, we just want to pass the bill. So whatever method we can do, we will do it.
Well, I know that to follow up on that question, Congressman Upton had mentioned that there have been, it sounds like, at least some preliminary overtures to the Senate. Can you give us a sense of what that's going to look like and what you're expecting in that sort of negotiation?
Well, we're just starting. We'll confess, we're just starting. I was on our worksheet that Diane and I went through last week, and we're missing a really good player. I got to tell you, and I don't know if you have folks that are watching from Tennessee or Lamar Alexander, but he did a wonderful job. And Mitch McConnell did a wonderful job as well. They were real leaders. That, of course, has been in the majority. Patty Murray was a big help for sure. And she was sort of in that arm grip with Lamar to get it done. But, you know, we're just starting to like to think that by doing our homework now that they can accept what we're doing. Roy Blunt was a big hit. I'll just say, in the meeting that we had with the president a couple of weeks ago, Roy Blunt was in that meeting, as well as Van Hollen was there. Was Schumer? No. But it's you know, you need the appropriators and the authorizers to work together, and ultimately, I think we're going to be looking to the president to make sure that this stays on the rails. But yeah, we're going to be outreaching to the Senate to make sure that they don't have any particular concerns and ideas that they might have. We welcome them to be part of this process, as we did before.
Yeah, I mean, when we did 21st Century Cures, we met with the Senate regularly to talk about what we were doing, and I expect we'll do that more. Our staffs have been talking to the Senate staffs all along in developing Cures 2.0. And as Fred said, when we went to the White House a few weeks ago to meet with the president and vice president about ARPA-H, we had some of the key players from the Senate as well as the House bipartisan there, and everybody was enthusiastic about this concept of ARPA-H. So I think that there will be a lot of good bipartisan work on it, and bicameral.
Given that focus by the president on ARPA-H, are you concerned, or should we as the cell and gene therapy sector be concerned that anything that would be really important for us that we've worked with you on previously might fall out in favor of other things such as ARPA-H, or do you just see the pie as potentially getting a little bigger to be more inclusive?
Oh, no, I think it'll be more inclusive. That's what happened with 21st Century Cures. When we were developing 21st Century Cures, we realized we had, as Fred said, we had been working on that bill for like 3 years. And then during the last year of his vice presidency, Vice President Biden came up with this cancer moonshot concept. And so we actually went over to the White House and met with Vice President Biden to talk to him about including the cancer moonshot in 21st Century Cures, which was pretty much written at that point, because there's no way that that there was the time frame to be able to pass both cures, which was pretty much baked, and then this new idea of the cancer moonshot. So it's a kind of uncanny the way the similarities this time, because Fred and I have been working on Cures 2.0 for since before the pandemic. During the pandemic, we just kept honing it. And so this come up relatively recently. So we think it's a good vehicle, and it's not a matter of taking one thing out to do another.
Great. Ultra rare conditions, of course, were mentioned by you, Congresswoman. They're particularly challenging just because of small patient populations, et cetera. Are there any particular policy areas that your teams, as they're looking at Cures 2.0, have been exploring to really help patients affected by ultra rare and high unmet medical need?
Well, of course, we had some great provisions in 21st Century Cures for the rare disease community. And I think many of the things that we're focusing on in our new concept paper are going to be really of particular interest to the rare disease community, because for example, some of the data aggregation that we're doing and the research will really help to identify small patient populations. But I always say this when I'm talking about the data provisions: we really want to be able to encourage that type of research, but we also want to make sure that patients' privacy is protected. So we have both of those provisions in the bill, and I think that's really going to help. I really think that's going to help with the rare disease community. The patient experience data that's going to be coming in, I think, will help. And many of the other, I could go on. The novel trial designs and other innovations in drug development, I think, will help people target drugs to rare diseases. The increased use of real world evidence, I think, always helps with all research, not just for the rare diseases. So there's a lot in there that I think can be really targeted.
And I think the ARPA stuff will help us as well, because I mean, we all care about these rare diseases, and that's frankly was one of the big pushes for us to get cures done. Is we wanted to provide the real help to solve the hope that those families had.
We have one question that's more about kind of your guidance and your thinking regarding FDA responsiveness. Obviously has been significantly impacted by COVID and the search for the vaccines and approvals. So much so that companies have been waiting for months, sometimes for responses from FDA for non-COVID. They're getting a tremendous stress, especially for smaller companies. The question is really, what advice do you have to, help get the FDA back on track, especially now that the pandemic is getting more under control?
Well, a couple of things. One, I think we need to get a permanent director. And of course, that works. That was a little bit of it. I won't say it was an issue. It was raised at the hearing that we had last week with the Secretary of HHS, Becerra. And in fact, you heard, for anyone that watched it, you heard good comments on both sides of the aisle, Republican and Democrat, for Janet Woodcock, who I got to say was a very big help as we did 21st Century Cures. She participated in a number of our roundtables along with Francis Collins and others. She knows her stuff, and I'm sure she's probably on pins and needles, as she is one on the short list. But we'd like to get this thing resolved. It's almost June. We've known that President Biden's won since November, so let's get with it and get someone there that can help ride herd. And frankly, I think she'd do an excellent job. She's a very good constructive player in making sure that we in fact delivered on the resources for the FDA.
Yeah, this is a continual issue, and obviously with COVID, all the agency's resources were directed to that, but disease does not stop, and research was it was harmed, but it wasn't stopped either. And I think now that I agree with Fred, getting getting a permanent director of the FDA, administrator of the FDA, is really critical. And I love Janet too. So I know she's on the short list, but they need to, they need to get somebody in that position who can really take them to the next level, and to implement all of the changes we made, not just in 21st Century Cures, but also in the Breakthrough Therapies bill that was expanded by Cures. And then if this passes, all of the new innovations there as well. Operation Warp Speed was an incredible collaboration. And Fred and I think Fred said this, we feel that our legislation in part helped facilitate that, but we now need to be able to do that for other drugs and devices as well, to review those applications and get them approved as quickly as we can. And also, Fred and I are both on energy and commerce, so we think about the policy end of it. We have to make sure that over in the appropriations committee, they're actually funding it. And we have good commitments from the appropriations team, Rosa DeLauro and Tom Cole, and all of their what are they called? The Cardinals. All of the Cardinals, they really support robust funding for NIH and FDA. So we're going to keep pushing for that too.
Well, perfect. We just had a question come in as a follow-up to that, and we did talk about support for CBER funding. The question is, OTAT is under-resourced and overworked. Can Cures 2.0 address the staffing needs, in particular, the needs for quality decisions, quality advice, and more staff and high-quality staff that developers feel are needed, particularly in this burgeoning sector?
Well, the answer is it could. I don't know what the administration request was for the FTEs for that. I don't know, but it's something we can take a look at.
Yeah, when we did Cures, when we did 21st Century Cures, a lot of these funding decisions, or a lot of the funding, well, obviously the funding decisions are all made by the appropriations committee, but the authorization is in our committee. And we didn't, I don't think we have any specific funding recommendations in Cures 2.0, but that doesn't mean there won't be.
Let's turn a little bit to a slightly different subject, one that I think keeps a lot of us awake at night, and that is drug pricing reform. In your opinion, what do you believe in terms of those reforms that Congress should be tackling? And then really what reform should be left to the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Innovation, particularly in terms of addressing new and innovative payment models?
Well, this might be something Fred and I actually disagree on, but we both will agree, that that drug pricing is not if a drug is too expensive for somebody, then it's not going to help cure them. On the other hand, we have to make sure that we are not to thwart research and innovation, and this is the really fine line that we walk, and particularly with a lot of what your members are working on, innovative drugs, different therapies. It's real. I think this is a conversation that has not yet been solved about how you pay for those. But there are some things that have been pretty. I think there's some discussions that are pretty self-evident. I'm the co-chair of the Diabetes Caucus, which is the largest issue-based caucus in Congress, and for diabetics, a bottle of insulin that cost $30 in 2009, 2010, now can cost $300, literally. And so in part, and it's the same insulin. And in part, and I think in most part, that has happened because of the way drug pricing has developed under private insurance plans with the drug manufacturers, the PBMs, the insurance companies. And so I would be in favor of, and this is not going to be popular with your members, but I'm just going to say it. I'm in favor of some kind for drugs like insulin, that particularly insulins that have been around some time. I think we need to have some kind of negotiated price. And so I'm still trying to work on, well, there is a bill, it's a bipartisan bicameral bill that we're getting ready to introduce on insulin, but for other of the sort of standard drugs, we have to figure out the most appropriate way to do that.
The drug pricing issue is pretty sticky, as Diane and I both maneuver with this a little bit. I'd like to see it end up, and this last Congress was a pretty partisan debate. I think there were 2 Republicans that voted for HR 3, and as a number of us that voted against it predicted, it wasn't going to go anywhere, and it didn't, and so we didn't do anything. We had on the Republican side, we put together a number of bills that had bipartisan support through markup in committee, some of them even unanimous, but all had bipartisan support. They were put together as one. It's called HR 19. Ultimately, we got about as many Democrats to vote for that as Republicans had voted for HR 5. Didn't pass the House. HR 3 did, but it ended up nowhere. And so we lost all the bipartisan stuff that we could have had, including the insulin issue, which was in HR 19. And also I think it was in HR 3 as well. But we ended up with nothing. And so I don't know what's going to come. I hope it doesn't become a political debate, because if it does, nothing's going to happen. We need to deal with this, and we'll see. I don't know quite yet how this is going to play out, what the Senate's going to do. But it's an issue that's going to hang around. But, with divided government, and that's what we have, pretty close in the House. We just lost a member who retired, Steve Stivers, a really good guy from Ohio, even though he's a Buckeye, I'm a Wolverine, resigned last week to take another job. So I think it's 218 to 211, I think is what the count is. So that's pretty close. So you get 4 Democrats who moved to the Republicans, and of course the Senate's 50-50. So it really is divided government. You got to get something done, you got to work together. And I'm not sure that we're going to get there on the drug pricing bill. It's forces are sort of lining up, but both Diane and I are staying out of that debate as we look at getting tiers done.
I will say though, we've sort of revisited our issue of the insulin bill as a model of what and it's me and Tom Reed in the House, and it's Congresswoman Collins and Congresswoman
Capital, maybe?
no, I'm just blanking. She'll kill me. I'll think of it.
Yeah.
I can see her. But anyway, it's bipartisan, bicameral. And we're thinking that maybe this bill, which everybody, Congresswoman Shaheen, in the Senate, and we're thinking that this bill might be a model for what we could do with some of these everyday drugs which the prices are being really inflated by the insurance process and not by research. And so that might be something that we could really talk about on a bipartisan basis. And then we could use it as a basis for conversations in the future.
So that's one of the main issues, of course, with regenerative medicines, of course, because they're durable, sometimes even curative, and then single dosage or a handful of administrations, and then not on the back end. So to your point, Congresswoman, someone who is a diabetic and has to take insulin daily, if there were to be able to be a durable or curative therapy, then those costs would be eliminated down the road. That said, yeah, many members of Congress, though, don't seem to be open to innovative payment models that would allow us to just create the opportunity for payers and developers to get together and figure out what might work. How might we convince some of your colleagues that really looking at new paradigms for innovative new therapies is really the way to go? We can't rely on 20th century policy for 21st century science.
Yeah, and I've spent so much time talking to developers of exactly these types of drugs. I talked about cystic fibrosis in my opening statement. And of course, there's now drugs that will cure some forms of cystic fibrosis. So how do you figure out the pricing for that drug? And then, well, so you figure out, we all know it's wildly expensive to have cystic fibrosis, not to mention the personal toll and early death and all of that. But how do you figure that out in a pricing scheme? And then how do you figure out how to pay for it? And they have done that with some of these drugs. CMS has done that with some of these drugs, but I think this is one of the most important conversations that we have to have. And as Fred says, if we all retreat into our partisan corners and we can't talk about this, then we're never going to solve the problem. And that's not going to benefit anybody, most especially the patients.
Absolutely. Congressman, anything else from you to add to that?
No. Well said.
Well, I would like to just say to both of you on behalf of the entire ARM team and our sponsors and our members, really want to thank you for joining us today. Super insightful. Thank you for your candor and your good humor and your insights. And we really look forward to working with you. Can't wait to see when the next discussion draft comes out in a few weeks. And of course, we'll be knocking on your door with ideas and comments. And always we are here as a resource. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much. It was wonderful.
We look forward to it. Thanks, Paige.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Well, to everyone else who joined us, thank you and have a good evening.